that maps out exactly how a guy named David completely flipped his life upside down, going from the grueling daily grind of a poor taxi driver to running an entire business empire. It is literally a masterclass in the power of incremental progress, and it completely proves that your starting point doesn't have to dictate your finish line. I am so excited to break this one down for you. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of how he actually built that empire, I want you to consider this little mystery. Why does a highly successful CEO keep a broken down, old yellow taxi parked right outside his modern, gleaming company headquarters? I mean, it's a great question, right? You've got this state-of-the-art building, the ultimate symbol of massive success, and right there in the prime parking spot sits this rusty relic of the past. To find the answer and to really get to the bottom of his incredible success, we need to jump back 10 years in time to where this story actually begins. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Life Behind the Wheel, the Grind of a Poor Driver. So, picture this. A decade ago, David was a struggling taxi driver, just trying to navigate the chaotic, crowded streets of a busy city. He was putting in these incredibly long hours behind the wheel, day in and day out, just trying to scrape enough together to support his family. And his external reality, it was undeniably harsh. Some days he barely earned enough to cover his basic bills. On top of that, his taxi, that same yellow cab we were just talking about, broke down constantly, which obviously makes an already exhausting job so much harder. And to make matters worse, he was just surrounded by doubters. People actively telling him he'd never amount to anything more than what he was right then. But in stark contrast to that grueling environment was his internal drive. Because despite the deep exhaustion and the empty pockets, every single morning, David woke up well before sunrise. He cleaned his taxi, slapped a smile on his face, and started his shift with absolute hope. He possessed this unshakable belief that honesty and hard work would eventually change his life. He just flat out refused to let his difficult circumstances dictate his attitude. Which brings us to a pivotal moment in our analysis. Section 2, the rainy evening encounter, a mindset shift. You see, the real turning point for David didn't come from a winning lottery ticket or some random inheritance. It actually happened on a dreary, rainy evening while he was just doing his usual monotonous airport runs. He picked up an elderly businessman, and the atmosphere in the cab was exactly what you'd expect on a bad night. Heavy rain, terrible traffic, and David is driving the struggling vehicle. But during that ride, David didn't complain, not once. Instead, his polite, relentlessly hardworking nature totally stood out to his passenger. In a world where it feels like everyone complains about their lot in life, David's quiet diligence was kind of magnetic. It stood out so much, in fact, that it prompted the businessman to lean forward from the backseat and ask him a very direct question. "Why do you work so hard?" And David's answer, it was profound. He didn't say, "Because I have bills to pay," even though that was absolutely true. And let's be honest, that would be the standard answer for almost anyone else in his shoes. Instead, he said, "Because I have a dream. One day I want to own a transportation company and provide a better life for my family." I absolutely love this detail because it shows that David had a clearly defined goal all along. He wasn't just driving aimlessly trying to survive the week. He was working toward a highly specific future. Having a clearly defined vision right in the middle of poverty, that is a superpower. It gave him absolute clarity, and that clarity deeply impressed his passenger. Before the businessman left the cab at his destination, he handed David his business card with a really simple yet powerful piece of advice. Never stop believing in yourself. Now, our source notes that David kept that physical card in his wallet for years. Think about how psychologically powerful that is for a second. When the daily grind really wore him down, or when the taxi broke down yet again, or the doubters just got way too loud, he had a tangible physical reminder right there in his pocket. It was a token from someone successful who looked at him on a random rainy night, saw his potential, and actively validated his dream. It literally became his emotional anchor. So, how does this actually translate into success? Let's look at Section 3, Scaling the Dream, Step by Step. Because, motivation and dreams are great, but execution is what actually creates change. David started applying this newfound encouragement by making some incredibly strict financial adjustments. Instead of spending money on unnecessary things, he became laser-focused. His discipline was absolute. He started saving a tiny fraction of every single fare he collected. Sometimes we're talking just a few dollars a day. But over time, those few dollars snowballed enough for him to buy a second taxi and actually hire another driver. Then, maintaining that exact same relentless discipline, he saved enough from 2 cars to buy a third taxi, then a fourth. We are watching the incredible power of compounding effort right here. His small daily discipline was actively scaling his dream into a real business. It wasn't overnight success. It was the slow, steady drumbeat of incremental progress. Okay, but let's just pump the brakes for a second because the source material makes a really important point here. This was definitely not a smooth ride. David faced some very harsh realities. Drivers quit unexpectedly, key business decisions totally failed. The financial pressure was so immense that there were days he felt like just giving up completely. Every entrepreneur hits these walls, right? And it's exactly where most people stop. But the difference is, whenever David faced a devastating setback, he remembered his why. He remembered his family, and he remembered that rainy night with a businessman. So instead of quitting when it got painful, he just worked harder. He actively learned new business skills, and he forced himself to just keep moving forward. Which brings us to the present day. Section 4, Lessons in Persistence. Fast forward 10 years. Today, David no longer drives a taxi. He actually owns one of the most successful transportation companies in the entire city. We're talking about a massive operation, with dozens of vehicles and employees under his direct leadership. His reality completely caught up to the dream he spoke about in that cab a decade earlier. And that brings us perfectly back to resolving our opening mystery, right? Why keep the old taxi? Well, one day, while standing in front of his massive company headquarters, David looked at that old yellow taxi. He keeps it parked to their own purpose, right in the premier spot, as a permanent reminder of his journey. As David explains it himself, it wasn't luck that changed my life. It was persistence, discipline, and believing in my dream when nobody else did. David's story has inspired thousands of people, and the source material distills some beautiful, universal takeaways for all of us. Because honestly, these principles apply to pretty much any goal. First up, keep working hard, even when you aren't seeing immediate massive results. The grind has a purpose. Second, stay patient. Remember, this incredible transformation took him 10 years of compounding effort. It takes time to build something lasting. Third, never stop believing in yourself, especially when the doubters are loud and circumstances look grim. And finally, recognize that every small step, even just saving a few dollars from a single fare, actually moves the needle. It all adds up. So I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. What small step will you take toward your dream today? David started by simply cleaning his car before sunrise and saving pennies. It doesn't require a massive, intimidating leap. It just requires persistent forward motion. Think about how you can apply David's structured discipline to your own life right now. The power of compounding effort is available to everyone who's just willing to start. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.